Elena Moretti stood in her kitchen at midnight, her hands working mechanically through the dough she'd kneaded 3 times already. The flour dusted across the marble countertop like fresh snow, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she registered that she'd probably regret the mess in the morning. But tonight, she didn't care. Tonight marked 3 years since she'd walked down an aisle covered in white roses, 3 years since she'd promised forever to a man who couldn't even remember what day it was. The pasta maker clicked rhythmically as she fed another sheet through its rollers, the sound filling the silence of their penthouse apartment. She'd learned to cook from her grandmother in a tiny kitchen in Brooklyn, where the walls were stained with decades of tomato sauce, and the air always smelled like basil. Back then, cooking had meant love, family, gathered around a table that barely fit 6 people, but somehow always accommodated 8. Now, cooking meant waiting. Always waiting. Marcus Ashford's key turned in the lock at 12:43 in the morning. Elena didn't look up from her work, didn't pause in her movements. She heard his briefcase hit the floor in the foyer, heard his expensive Italian shoes against the hardwood as he made his way through their sprawling apartment. She knew the exact moment he noticed the light spilling from the kitchen, knew when he saw her there, because his footsteps hesitated. "Elena?" His voice carried that tone of mild surprise, as if finding his wife awake at this hour was somehow unusual, as if this hadn't become their routine. "What are you doing up?" She pressed the dough through the roller one more time, now watching the sheet emerge thinner, more delicate. "Making pasta," she said simply, her voice steady despite the tightness in her chest. Marcus stepped into the kitchen, and she could see him from the corner of her eye, still in his suit, tie loosened, dark hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it, a habit he had when he was stressed. At 38, Marcus Ashford was everything the magazine said he was. Brilliant, driven, devastatingly handsome with those sharp gray eyes and that commanding presence that made boardrooms fall silent. But standing in their kitchen at nearly 1 in the morning, he just looked tired. "At this hour?" he asked, moving to the refrigerator and pulling out a bottle of water. "Couldn't sleep?" Elena finally looked at him then. Really looked at him, and then something in her chest cracked a little wider. He genuinely didn't know. He had no idea what today was, what he'd missed, what they'd lost somewhere between his last merger and his latest acquisition. "Do you know what day it is, Marcus?" He paused, the water bottle halfway to his lips, and she watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. That brilliant mind that could memorize stock portfolios and market trends, that could recall every detail of a business negotiation from 6 months ago, was drawing a complete blank. "Wednesday?" he offered, and the uncertainty in his voice told her he wasn't even sure about that. "It's Thursday," she corrected, turning back to her pasta. "Thursday, June 15th, our anniversary. 3 years today." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena continued working, cutting the pasta into neat strips, laying them out on the floured surface. She'd cried earlier, standing in their bedroom at 9 o'clock when it became clear he wouldn't be home for dinner. She'd cried at 10 when his assistant had called to say he was still in a meeting. She'd cried at 11 when she'd finally taken off the dress she'd bought specifically for tonight and changed into leggings and an old t-shirt. But now, at nearly 1 in the morning, she was all cried out. Now she just felt hollow. "Elena, Marcus started, and she could hear the apology forming, the same apology she'd heard 100 times before. "I'm so sorry. Work has been insane with the merger, and I completely forgot," she finished for him, her voice flat. "You forgot. Just like you forgot our dinner reservation last month. Just like you forgot my birthday in March." Just like you've forgotten that we're supposed to be building a life together, not running parallel lives that occasionally intersect when you happen to come home before I've gone to bed. She set down the knife with more force than necessary, the clatter echoing through the kitchen. 3 years. They'd only been married 3 years, and already they felt like strangers who happened to share an address. She thought about their wedding day, about the promises they'd made. Marcus had written his own vows, had stood before 200 guests, and told her that she was his home, his peace, his everything. She'd believed him then. She'd believed that the ambitious businessman who'd pursued her with the same intensity he brought to his deals would always make her feel that cherished. "I've been offered a partnership," she said suddenly, the words escaping before she could second-guess them. "Grace called today. She's opening a restaurant in Portland, and she wants me to be her partner. 50-50 split, full creative control over the menu, everything I've been dreaming about since I closed my catering business." Marcus set down his water bottle, his full attention on her now. "Portland? Elena, that's across the country. You can't be serious." "Can't I?" She turned to face him fully, crossing her arms over her chest. "What exactly am I staying here for, Marcus? To wander around this apartment alone? To fall asleep by myself every night? To celebrate anniversaries by myself because my husband is too busy building his empire to remember he has a wife?" "That's not fair," Marcus said, or his voice taking on that edge it got when he was backed into a corner. "You know how important this merger is. I'm doing this for us, for our future." "What future?" The words came out sharper than she intended, years of swallowed frustration finally breaking free. "We don't have a future, Marcus. We have your schedule, your meetings, your acquisitions. I gave up my business to support your career. I gave up my dreams because you said we needed to focus on getting your company to the next level. And I did it because I loved you, because I believed in us. But there is no us anymore. There's just you and your work, and me waiting in the wings like some 1950s housewife, hoping her husband might notice she exists." Marcus's jaw tightened, and she could see him shifting into the mode he used in negotiations. Analytical, defensive, or ready to argue his case. "That's not fair, and you know it. I've never asked you to give up anything. If you wanted to pursue your restaurant dreams, you could have. I would have supported you." "Supported me?" Elena laughed. But there was no humor in it. "Like you supported me last year when I was looking at locations. You had your assistant call to tell me you couldn't make the appointment because you had an emergency meeting. Or the time before that when I wanted to meet with investors, but you needed me to host a dinner party for your board members. You say you support me, but your actions tell a different story." She turned away, gripping the edge of the counter, trying to steady herself. "I'm tired, Marcus. I'm tired of feeling invisible in my own marriage. I'm tired of planning my life around your schedule only to have those plans canceled at the last minute. I'm tired of lying awake wondering if this is really what the rest of my life looks like." "Elena, please." He stepped toward her, reaching for her arm, but she pulled away. "I need space," she said quietly. "I need to think about what I want, about whether this marriage is something worth fighting for or if we're just going through the motions because it's easier than admitting we've failed." The word hung between them like a blade. Failed. Marcus Ashford, the man who'd built a tech empire from nothing, who'd never lost a negotiation, who'd turned every obstacle into an opportunity. The idea of failure was anathema to him. She could see it in the way his face paled, in the way his hands clenched at his sides. "You know you want a divorce?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know what I want," Elena admitted, and the truth of it settled over her like a weight. I just know I can't keep living like this. I can't keep being the wife who waits and hopes and makes excuses. I deserve more than that. We both deserve more than that." She moved past him, flour still dusting her hands, her heart hammering in her chest. At the doorway, she paused, looking back at him, standing in their kitchen surrounded by the evidence of her midnight breakdown. The pasta scattered across the counter, the flour everywhere, the opened bottles of wine she'd used for the sauce. He looked lost, like he'd walked into the wrong house and couldn't figure out how to get back to familiar ground. "I'll be in the guest room," she said softly. "I think we both need some time to think about what we really want from this marriage, if we want anything at all." She left him there in the kitchen, and with each step down the hallway toward the guest room, she felt something inside her shift. Fear, maybe, or freedom. She wasn't sure which. Behind her, she heard no footsteps following, no voice calling her back. Just silence, stretching out like an ocean between them. And as she closed the guest room door behind her, sliding down against it until she was sitting on the floor, Elena Moretti wondered if she'd just saved her marriage or ended it. Morning arrived with the kind of brutal sunshine that made no allowances for heartbreak or sleepless nights. Elena woke on top of the guest room covers, still in her clothes from the night before, her mouth dry and her eyes gritty from crying. For a moment, she lay there disoriented, trying to remember why she wasn't in her own bed. Then it all came rushing back. The forgotten anniversary, the confrontation, the confession about Portland. She sat up slowly, running her hands through her tangled dark hair, and checked her phone. 7:30 in the morning, and she had 3 missed calls from Grace and a text message asking if everything was okay. Elena had apparently pocket-dialed her best friend at some point during the night. She typed out a quick response saying she'd call later, then forced herself to stand. Her body ached like she'd run a marathon, though all she'd done was knead pasta dough and dismantle her marriage. The apartment was quiet as she made her way to the kitchen, and she assumed Marcus had already left for the office. It was his pattern, up at 5:30, and at his desk by 6:30, always the first one in. But when she rounded the corner into the kitchen, she stopped short. Marcus was there, still in yesterday's suit pants and shirt, though the shirt was now wrinkled and untucked. He was standing at the stove, and something was burning. "What are you doing?" The question came out sharper than she intended, but shock had temporarily overridden her exhaustion. Marcus jumped, spinning around with a spatula in hand. His hair stuck up at odd angles, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he'd slept about as well as she had. "I'm making breakfast," he announced, then looked down at the pan where what might have once been eggs had transformed into a blackened, smoking mass. "Or I'm trying to." Elena moved to the stove on autopilot, turning off the burner and moving the ruined pan to a cool surface. "You don't cook," she said, more confused than anything else. In 3 years of marriage, she could count on one hand the number of times she'd seen Marcus in the kitchen for anything other than grabbing food someone else had prepared. "I know," he admitted, setting down the spatula. "I'm terrible at it. But I called the office this morning and canceled all my meetings for the week. I cleared my schedule completely. No calls, no emails, nothing. Just us." Elena stared at him, certain she'd misheard. "You what?" "I canceled everything," Marcus repeated, and now she could see something in his expression she hadn't seen in months. Uncertainty, vulnerability, fear. "Elena, last night when you walked away, when you said you didn't know if this marriage was worth fighting for, I couldn't sleep. I sat in that kitchen for hours trying to figure out when everything went so wrong. And I realized I don't actually remember. I don't remember the moment we stopped being us and started being two people who happened to live in the same apartment. He ran a hand through his already messy hair, a gesture of frustration she knew well. I've spent the past 5 years building Ashford Tech into what it is today. I've sacrificed sleep, health, relationships, everything. Because I told myself it mattered, that success mattered. But sitting in that kitchen last night, I realized that if I lose you, none of it matters. The company, the money, the reputation, it's all meaningless if I come home to an empty apartment every night. Elena leaned against the counter, her arms wrapped around herself, afraid to believe what she was hearing. Marcus, you can't just cancel a week of work. The merger can wait, he interrupted firmly. Or it can't, and I'll deal with the consequences. But right now, you matter more. This matters more. I want 7 days. 1 week to prove to you that I can change, that I can be the husband you deserve. No work, no distractions. Just us figuring out if we still have something worth saving. She studied his face, looking for the catch, the caveat, the inevitable but that would follow. Marcus Ashford didn't clear his schedule. He didn't cancel meetings. His company was his religion, his boardroom, his temple. And if after 7 days we realize we're too broken to fix? She asked quietly. Then at least we'll know we tried, Marcus said, and in the rawness in his voice caught her off guard. At least we'll know we gave it everything before we walked away. Elena, I don't want a divorce. I don't want you to move to Portland. But more than that, I don't want you to be miserable. I don't want you to feel invisible or forgotten or like you're just waiting for your life to start. So give me 1 week. Let me try. Elena closed her eyes, exhaustion and hope warring inside her. She'd been ready to call Grace this morning and tell her yes to Portland, ready to start packing up her life and moving forward alone. But the man standing in front of her, with his rumpled clothes and his burned eggs and his desperate earnestness. This was the man she'd fallen in love with 4 years ago. The question was whether that man was still in there somewhere, and or if he'd been consumed entirely by the businessman who'd replaced him. 1 condition, she said finally, opening her eyes to meet his. No half measures. If we're doing this, we're really doing it. That means when things get uncomfortable, when we have conversations that are hard, you don't shut down or hide behind work. You stay present. You stay honest. Can you do that? Yes, Marcus said immediately. Anything. Just tell me where to start. Elena looked around the kitchen at the evidence of his failed breakfast attempt and felt something in her chest loosen just slightly. We start tonight, 7 o'clock here in this kitchen. We're going to cook dinner together. Nothing fancy, just something simple. And while we cook, we talk, really talk, about everything we've been avoiding, everything we've been too scared or too busy to say. Okay, Marcus agreed. What should I prepare? Should I buy groceries? Should I? Marcus, Elena interrupted gently. This isn't a business deal. You don't need a strategy or a plan. You just need to show up. That's all I'm asking. Just show up. He nodded, and for a moment they stood there in the kitchen, the morning light streaming through the windows, the smell of burned eggs lingering in the air. It wasn't romantic, and it wasn't a guarantee of anything. But it was a start. A tentative, fragile start to finding their way back to each other. The rest of the day passed strangely for Elena. She busied herself with mundane tasks, laundry, cleaning, returning emails from friends she'd been neglecting. She spoke to Grace, explaining the situation, and asking for a few days before she gave her answer about Portland. Grace had been supportive, but worried, reminding Elena that she deserved to be happy, whether that was with Marcus or without him. Elena knew she was right. The question was whether happiness with Marcus was still possible. At 6:30 that evening, she found herself back in the kitchen, pulling ingredients from the refrigerator. She'd decided on something simple: homemade spaghetti with marinara sauce, garlic bread, a basic salad. The kind of meal her grandmother would have called comfort food. The kind that fed the soul as much as the body. She was chopping tomatoes when she heard Marcus's footsteps. He appeared in the doorway at exactly 7 o'clock, and Elena had to suppress a smile. He'd changed into jeans and a simple gray t-shirt, and he looked nervous, like he was walking into a job interview rather than his own kitchen. "I'm here," he announced unnecessarily. "Where do you need me?" "Start with the garlic," Elena said, gesturing to the cutting board she'd set up for him. "Mince it fine, and try not to cut yourself. The knife is sharp." They worked in silence at first, the only sounds the rhythmic chopping and the water running when Elena rinsed the tomatoes. It was awkward and stilted, neither of them quite sure how to navigate this new dynamic. Marcus was concentrating so hard on the garlic that she could see the tension in his shoulders. And when he finally looked up, he had the expression of someone who just defused a bomb. "How's this?" he asked, showing her the minced garlic. Elena looked at it. Some pieces too large, some too small, to nothing uniform, and felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. "It's perfect," she said, and meant it. Because it wasn't about the garlic. It was about him trying, about him being here, about him keeping his promise to show up. "Now what?" Marcus asked, and she could hear genuine interest in his voice. "Now we heat the oil," Elena said, turning on the burner. "And you tell me about your father's bankruptcy. You mentioned it last night, but you've never really told me the whole story." Marcus's hand stilled on the cutting board, and she watched his expression close off automatically, a defense mechanism she'd seen 100 times before. But then he took a breath, and she could see him consciously choosing to stay open. "It happened when I was 12. He began slowly, adding the garlic to the heated oil like she showed him. Oh, one day we had everything: big house, new cars, vacations. And the next day, it was all gone. Dad had made some bad investments, trusted the wrong people, and it all collapsed. We lost the house. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a bad neighborhood. I watched my father become a shell of himself." Elena stirred the tomatoes into the pot, listening without interrupting, giving him space to continue. "My mother had to go back to work for the first time in 15 years. My younger brother Daniel and I shared a room. We were on food stamps. I went from private school to public school, and the other kids could smell the poverty on me." Marcus's jaw tightened, and she could see the old pain surface. "I swore to myself that I would never let that happen to me. Never be that vulnerable. Never trust my security to anyone or anything but my own ability to work harder, to be smarter, to succeed where my father failed." "Is that why you work so hard?" Elena asked softly. "Because you're afraid it'll all disappear?" "I know it's irrational," Marcus admitted. "Ashford Tech is worth billions. We're stable, successful, growing. But somewhere in my head, there's still that 12-year-old kid watching the repo men take away the family car. There's still that fear that if I slow down, if I take my foot off the gas for even a moment, it'll all fall apart." Elena moved closer to him, their shoulders almost touching as they stood side by side at the stove. "But that's not really living, Marcus. That's just surviving. There's a difference." He looked at her then, really looked at her. Akarsham, and she saw tears gathering in his eyes that he blinked away. I know. And I've used that fear as an excuse to avoid everything else. It's easier to bury myself in work than to face the possibility that I might fail at something that really matters. Like being a husband, like being a partner to someone I love. They fell silent again. But this time it wasn't awkward. It was contemplative, both of them stirring their respective pots, the kitchen filling with the smells of garlic and tomatoes and basil. Elena thought about her own fears, her own reasons for letting her dreams slide away. I closed my catering business because I was scared, she said finally, surprising herself with the admission. I told myself it was to support your career, and that was part of it. But really, I was terrified of failing. My grandmother was an amazing cook, beloved in our neighborhood. My mother had her own restaurant for 10 years. I had these huge shoes to fill, and the pressure of living up to that legacy was crushing me. So when you needed support during that big acquisition, it felt like the perfect excuse to step back, to stop trying. Marcus turned off his burner and turned to face her fully. Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you say you were scared? Because you never seemed scared of anything, Elena said with a sad smile. You were this force of nature, conquering every challenge, winning every battle. I didn't want you to see me as weak. Elena, Marcus said, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. A gesture so tender and familiar, it made her heart ache. You're the strongest person I know. Walking away last night, us telling me the truth even though it was hard, that took more courage than anything I've ever done in a boardroom. I've been a coward. I've hidden behind my work because it's safe, because I know how to succeed there. But this, he gestured between them. This is terrifying because I don't have a strategy. I don't have a playbook. I can only show up and hope it's enough. Elena felt tears spill over, sliding down her cheeks. But they weren't entirely sad tears. Showing up is enough, she whispered. That's all I've ever wanted. Just you being present, being real. Marcus pulled her into his arms then, and she went willingly, pressing her face against his chest and breathing in the familiar scent of him. They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other while the marinara sauce simmered and the garlic bread waited to go into the oven, and Elena felt something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. Fragile and tentative, but real. One day down, Marcus murmured against her hair. 6 more to go. 6 more, Elena agreed, pulling back to look up at him. But tomorrow, you're learning how to make risotto. If we're doing this, we're doing it properly. He laughed, the sound rusty from disuse, and she realized she couldn't remember the last time she'd heard him laugh. Whatever you say, chef, I'm entirely in your hands. They finished making dinner together, talking more easily now, the ice broken. The pasta was overcooked and the garlic bread slightly burnt. But when they sat down to eat, it was the best meal Elena had had in months. Not because of the food, but because of the company. Because for the first time in longer than she could remember, she wasn't eating alone. She had her husband across from her, really present, really trying. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The next 6 days passed like a revelation, each one peeling back another layer of the armor they'd both built around themselves. Marcus, true to his word, kept his phone off and his laptop closed. Elena watched him twitch the first few times it rang, watched his fingers automatically reach for it before he consciously pulled back. By day 3, he didn't even flinch anymore when it buzzed with ignored notifications. They cooked every evening, and Marcus proved to be an unexpectedly enthusiastic student. He burned the risotto on day 2, sending clouds of smoke billowing through the penthouse and setting off the fire alarm. They'd stood on the balcony, wrapped in blankets, and laughing until tears streamed down their faces, while the building security verified there was no actual emergency. On day 3, he successfully made a passable coq au vin, and the pride on his face had made Elena's heart squeeze. By day 5, they were moving around the kitchen in sync, anticipating each other's movements, working together like they were dancing. But the cooking was just the framework. The real work happened in the conversations, in the truths they finally had the courage to share. Marcus told her about the pressure from his board members, about the nights he'd slept in his office because he couldn't bear to come home and see the disappointment in her eyes. Elena told him about the journal she'd kept, filled with restaurant ideas and menu concepts she'd been too afraid to share. They talked about his mother's remarriage to a kind man who'd helped rebuild the family's stability, about Elena's grief over her grandmother's death 2 years ago. Grief she'd never properly processed because Marcus had been in the middle of a product launch. On day 4, Daniel stopped by unannounced, took one look at his brother in jeans and an apron, and demanded to know if he'd been body snatched. Marcus had introduced his younger brother to Elena properly for the first time. They'd met at the wedding, but Marcus had always been too busy for family dinners or casual visits. The 3 of them had spent the afternoon on the terrace, drinking wine and sharing stories. And Elena had watched Marcus relax in a way she'd never seen, laughing at Daniel's impression of their mother's reaction when Marcus had told her he was taking a week off work. She literally asked if you had a terminal illness, Daniel had said, wiping tears from his eyes. I had to convince her you weren't dying, just finally prioritizing your marriage. I think she might have preferred the terminal illness explanation. It would have been more in character. On day 6, Grace video called, and Elena found herself introducing her best friend to Marcus like they were meeting for the first time. In a way, they were. Grace had only ever known the absent workaholic who occasionally appeared in Elena's life. This version of Marcus, relaxed, attentive, making terrible jokes while trying to fold napkins fancy the way Elena had shown him, was someone entirely different. So this is what you've been hiding, Grace had said after they'd hung up, her approval clear even through the screen. That's not the same man who canceled on your birthday dinner. No, Elena had agreed softly, watching Marcus in the kitchen, concentrating fiercely on plating the salmon they'd prepared. He's not. But it was day 7 that changed everything. Elena woke up that morning with butterflies in her stomach, knowing that this was it, the end of their week, the moment when they'd have to decide what came next. She found Marcus already awake, sitting on their terrace with 2 cups of coffee, watching the sunrise paint the city gold. Couldn't sleep? She asked, sliding into the chair beside him. Too much on my mind, Marcus admitted. Elena, this week with you, it's been the best week I've had in years, maybe ever. And I don't want it to end. But I also know that we can't live in a bubble. Eventually, I have to go back to work. Eventually, reality intrudes. And I'm terrified that the moment I walk back into that office, I'll fall back into old patterns. Elena sipped her coffee, considering her words carefully. I won't lie and say it'll be easy. Old habits are hard to break. But Marcus, this week proved something important. It proved that when you choose to be present, when you choose us, you can do it. The question isn't whether you're capable. The question is whether you'll make that choice consistently, even when it's hard. I want to, Marcus said earnestly. God, Elena, I want to so badly. But I also don't want to promise you something and then fail you again. You deserve better than that. Then don't promise. Elena said, on reaching over to take his hand. Don't make grand declarations about the future. Just promise me today. Promise me this moment. And then tomorrow, promise me that moment. We take it one day at a time, and we both commit to being honest when things start to slip. Marcus squeezed her hand, relief evident on his face. I can do that. One day at a time, I can promise you today. Good, Elena said, because I need to talk to you about something. I called Grace yesterday, and I told her no about Portland. Marcus's head snapped up, surprise clear in his expression. You did? Elena, I don't want you to give up your dreams for me. We just spent a week talking about how you'd already done that, and I don't. I'm not giving up my dreams. Elena interrupted, a smile playing at her lips. I'm just changing the location. And I want to open a restaurant here, Marcus, in the city, close to home, close to you. It's what I should have done from the beginning, instead of running away. But Portland was offering you everything you wanted, Marcus protested. Partnership, creative control. Everything except you, Elena finished. And that's the thing I realized this week. I don't want to build my dream alone. I don't want to punish you by leaving. I want to build something here, with you supporting me, the way I should have asked you to support me from the beginning. If the offer is still open. Marcus set down his coffee cup and pulled Elena into his lap, wrapping his arms around her waist. The offer was never off the table. I meant what I said. I want to help you build your dream. But Elena, I don't just want to write checks or connect you with investors. I want to be involved. I want to understand your vision, help with the business strategy, be your partner in this the way I should have been from the start. I'd like that, Elena said, leaning back against him, feeling more settled and sure than she had in months. But you have to promise that you won't try to take over. This is my dream, my vision. You're the support system, not the CEO. Marcus laughed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Noted. I'll try to remember that I'm the sous chef in this operation, not the head chef. They sat there in comfortable silence for a while, watching the city wake up below them, and Elena felt a sense of peace settle over her. The week wasn't magic. It hadn't fixed everything. There would still be hard days ahead, moments when Marcus slipped back into old patterns, times when Elena would have to speak up and remind him of what mattered. But they'd proven they could do the hard work. They'd proven they could be honest with each other. And that was enough to build on. I have something to show you, Marcus said suddenly, setting her gently on her feet and standing. Get dressed. We're going out. Marcus, where are we going? Elena asked. But he just smiled mysteriously and headed inside. An hour later, they pulled up outside a beautiful brick building in a trendy neighborhood Elena had always loved. The ground floor space was empty, but through the large windows, she could see gleaming stainless steel appliances, a half-installed kitchen, and what looked like dining space. What is this? Elena asked as Marcus helped her out of the car. This, Marcus said, pulling a key from his pocket, is the commercial kitchen space I mentioned. But it's also more than that. I leased it 6 months ago. Elena's head snapped around to stare at him. 6 months? But you never said... Because I wanted it to be a surprise for our anniversary, Marcus admitted, unlocking the door and holding it open for her. And then I completely forgot our anniversary, and everything went to hell. But Elena, even when I was at my worst, even when I was neglecting you and our marriage, somewhere in my head I was still thinking about your dreams. I was still planning for your success. I just did a terrible job of communicating that. Elena stepped inside, and her breath caught. The space was perfect. High ceilings, an open floor plan, a state-of-the-art kitchen that any chef would envy. There was even a small private dining area off to the side, intimate and elegant. Marcus, this is incredible. But a 6-month lease? If you got this in December, it's almost up. I know, Marcus said, coming to stand beside her. I kept renewing it month by month, telling myself that eventually I'd find the time to bring you here, to help you make this dream real. But I never did. Until now. He turned to her, taking both her hands in his. Elena, I don't have all the answers. I can't promise I'll never mess up again or that I'll always get the balance right. But I can promise that I'll keep trying. And I can promise that starting today, I'm committed to being your partner in every sense of the word. In our marriage and in making this restaurant happen. Elena looked around the space again, imagining it filled with diners, the kitchen bustling with activity, her creations being served to people who would appreciate them. Then she looked at her husband, at the hope and determination in his face, and felt her heart swell. Okay, she said softly. Let's do this. Together. Marcus pulled her into a kiss, deep and sweet and full of promise. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. I may have done one more thing, Marcus admitted sheepishly. Daniel and Grace are upstairs in the office space above the restaurant, along with 3 potential investors who are very interested in hearing your vision for this place. If you want to meet with them, no pressure. Elena hit him lightly on the chest, laughing. You did not ambush me with a business meeting. I like to think of it as being prepared, Marcus said, grinning. But, seriously, only if you're ready. If not, when we send them away and we spend the day planning together, just us. Your choice. Elena took a deep breath, looking around the space one more time. Her space, her dream, and this time, she wouldn't be doing it alone. Give me 20 minutes to pull my thoughts together. Then let's meet with them. But Marcus, you sit in the corner and you let me talk. This is my show. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said, executing a mock salute. Though I reserve the right to look incredibly proud of my wife the whole time. The meeting went better than Elena could have dreamed. The investors loved her concept, a restaurant that celebrated immigrant family recipes, where every dish told a story of someone's heritage. She talked about her grandmother's kitchen, about the way food connected people across cultures, about creating a space that felt like coming home. And Marcus kept his promise, sitting quietly in the corner. But every time she glanced his way, he was beaming. By the time they left 4 hours later, Elena had commitments from all 3 investors and a timeline to open within 6 months. Her head was spinning with possibilities, menu ideas, staffing decisions, design concepts. In the car, she couldn't stop talking, words tumbling over themselves as excitement bubbled up. And I was thinking we could have a rotating menu based on seasonal ingredients, but also a core menu of signature dishes that never change, and maybe a chef's table option where people can watch the kitchen in action. Marcus, are you listening? I'm listening, he assured her, reaching over to take her hand. I'm listening to my brilliant wife plan her empire. And I'm thinking about how lucky I am that you didn't give up on us. Elena squeezed his hand. I'm thinking the same thing. Well, I'm also thinking about appetizer options, but mostly about how lucky I am. That evening, they cooked one last dinner together in their penthouse kitchen. Pasta carbonara, the dish Marcus had actually managed to perfect over the week. As they worked side by side, falling into the rhythm they'd developed, Elena thought about how much had changed in 7 days. They weren't fixed, not completely. There would still be challenges ahead. Marcus would go back to work tomorrow, and they'd have to figure out how to maintain this connection in the real world. She would throw herself into opening the restaurant, and they'd have to make sure that didn't consume her the way work had consumed him. But as they sat down to eat, as Marcus told her a terrible joke that made her laugh until she snorted wine, as they cleaned up together and he snapped a dish towel at her playfully, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated joy in the moment, in his presence, in the life they were building together. Later that night, lying in their bed, not the guest room, but their bed together, Marcus pulled her close and whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Elena murmured, already half asleep. "For not giving up. For giving me a chance to prove I could be better. For believing that we were worth fighting for, even when I'd forgotten that." Elena turned in his arms to face him, touching his cheek gently. "We're going to make it, Marcus. It won't always be easy. But we're going to make it, because now we both know what we stand to lose, and we're both committed to not losing it again." 6 months later, Moretti and Company opened its doors to a line that wrapped around the block. The restaurant was everything Elena had dreamed, warm, welcoming, filled with the scents and sounds of her grandmother's kitchen, but elevated and refined. Marcus was there that first night, not in the kitchen or managing anything, but seated at the bar where he could watch his wife work. He'd kept his promise, maintaining better boundaries at work, leaving the office at 6 most days, making their marriage a priority. They still had disagreements, still had to navigate the balance between his career and hers, still had moments when old patterns threatened to reassert themselves. But they faced them together now, with honesty and communication. The final scene of their story found them months later, back in their penthouse kitchen on a quiet Sunday morning. They were making fresh pasta together, flour dusting the counter and their clothes, laughing as Marcus tried and failed to achieve the perfect thickness for fettuccine. The restaurant was closed on Sundays, and they'd made it their sacred day. No work, no meetings, just them. "You know," Marcus said, watching Elena expertly roll out her dough, "I used to think success meant having the biggest company, making the most money, winning every competition. But I was wrong." "Oh?" Elena looked up, curious. "What does success mean now?" Marcus moved behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "This, coming home to you, making pasta on a Sunday morning, watching you shine at the restaurant, having someone to share victories and defeats with. That's success. Everything else is just keeping score." Elena turned in his arms and kissed him softly. "I love you, Marcus Ashford, even when you burn the garlic." "I love you too, Elena Moretti Ashford," he replied, kissing her back, "even when you're a perfectionist about pasta thickness." They stood there in their kitchen, the morning light streaming through the windows, flour on their hands and love in their hearts. And both of them knew they'd finally gotten the recipe right. Not for pasta, though that was coming along nicely, but for marriage, for partnership, for a life built on presence and honesty and choosing each other every single day. The pasta maker clicked rhythmically as they went back to work, side by side, exactly where they were meant to be. If this story touched your heart, please like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message about second chances and fighting for love. And subscribe to our channel for more inspiring romance stories. Drop a comment below telling us, What's the most important ingredient in a lasting relationship? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Remember, it's never too late to choose love, to choose presence, to choose each other. Until next time, keep believing in the power of second chances.